this. Yes. Okay.
I'm born and raised in California, and based on what I've been hearing people on the internet tell me about the cost of living where they live, I am beginning to think that it is easier to be a broke person in a high cost of living city than it is to be a broke person in a cheap place. And let me explain why.
And I've been saying this online for so long when people are like, well, you live in California, it's so expensive. So let me give you a breakdown. When I was in my early 20s, like 2010, I was living in LA, and there was a year where I made $13,000. Now, I don't know if you know anything about living in LA, but $13,000 is not enough. But because it was in the city, it's easier to get by. And I don't know why that is, but it just is. Things may be more expensive per se. Rent is more expensive. When you compare like, X to X, yes, it seems like a lot more money. But I grew up in rural California, and when I'm talking about people making maybe $35,000 a year in 2010, they were barely able to scrape by. So tell me how I was also barely able to scrape by living off of $13,000 in LA. Well, first of all, there's more opportunities for rent. You get more ability just to like do weird living situations. Because in cities compared to rural areas, you have a lot more buildings, and they're all shaped weird. Like, for instance, I was living in what was supposed to be probably like a utilities loft. Like, I lived in a townhouse up the stairs. It was a 6-foot by maybe 7-foot room. I only know that because it was long enough for me to lay down, and I could touch, if I stretched out long enough, I could touch the walls. And because it was a weird living situation, that was like $200 rent, and I didn't have to be on anybody's lease, and it was fine. But if you go back to like my hometown, you have to make 3 times the rent to get a lease, and you're not allowed to have anybody. And because there's so few apartment buildings, you have to depend upon houses. And since everything's spread out, you need a car. You cannot get by without a car. You have to make 3 times as much, which means you either have to have a really well-off roommate or you have to have a partner, as compared to LA, where you can just find somebody's house or kitchen or divided room to split. And then you have to have a car. You have to have insurance. You have to have gas, as compared to just walking. I used to live in Hollywood proper for some of that time, and I literally could walk to 2 different jobs. I worked at the Chinese theater, as well as in the daytime, I used to work at a souvenir shop, right? And that was when I was making mad money. We're talking like $35,000 a year. This was 2011, right? I just came off that $13,000 a year, and I was like, what? But that's the thing, I could walk to those jobs, and they were right next to each other. The souvenir shop was downstairs from the Chinese theater. So now you don't have to have a car. You have public transit. You don't have to have those extra expenses. Plus, you have more options. I was in a studio with my boyfriend, $900 a month, splitting the cost. So much more housing opportunities. And it was not really a lease, because according to the rent manager, he's the one who told me to do this. He said that you are a music student from Czechoslovakia, put down the Music Institute as your school, and you are here on a student visa, so you don't have to provide your social security number. They don't have to give you any kind of credit checks. You don't get that in rural areas. You just don't. It's easier to get by in the cities. Not to mention, when you live in a place like California, there's a lot more social security because our taxes may be higher, but it goes into things funding projects like Medi-Cal and healthcare and better EBT access. It's just easier to live in an expensive place. Mark my words, it's not even just the higher minimum wage.